Okay. I would like to hear Comrade Twahira's thoughts on this, but let me just quickly attempt to respond to your question. I feel like one of the great conflicts of interest that any player in the immediate post-independence political period of Uganda had was deciding whether it was a blessing for us not to have violently contested the anti-colonial struggle, or whether it was a curse. Because what that meant was that without this violent upheaval and changing of guards from the colonial to the post-colonial order, you had a maintaining of the system as it was, and simply a changing of the faces and the office bearers, rather than a structural transformation of the entire structure as it was set up. So the way Uganda was governed prior to its independence is exactly the way it was governed immediately after its independence, simply that we now had Black African office bearers, and some would go as far as arguing it is precisely the same way it is being governed today. Of course, Amin, perhaps with all the chaos and anarchy that is attendant to his regime, might have been the only true revolutionary we have had in the entire political history of the country, because he shook up a system with the expulsion of the Asians, with the nationalization of land, a true agrarian revolution in the very specific sense of the word, an attempt to change those who own the factors and means of production, happened during his time. Of course, it was saddled with a lot of death and suffering and lack and an international slew of sanctions that punished the economy and individual citizens. But when it is looked at retrospectively, perhaps that is the only phase that we had a real, genuine attempt at changing the system from the ground up. But not to let that detain us. I think that it is that lack of the need for violent revolution that perhaps may have contributed to the sectarianism that we saw, because the colonial system was arranged in such a way as to selectively privilege, to fragment the African population, to fragment the governed, and kind of limit them into these customary tribal ethnic jurisdictions. And Mamdani, I think, is the foremost scholar on this subject, where he talks about citizen and subject and how it's important in the colonial logic to completely sever or break the link between the African and his sense of nationhood in a multicultural sense, and limit the African to looking at themselves as a member of a tribe and subject to customary law, therefore. And so this completely demobilizes any potential for the Africans to unite together against this ruling British minority that, was very disproportionately outnumbered, if only the Africans could have figured out that they all had the same interests and they were not necessarily as different or as distinct in their identity as they were made out to be. Yep, that would be my
Yeah.